March 31, 1945, Franconia, Germany. 11 p.m. A German officer's identification booklet lay open on a stone floor, and the man refusing to hand it over had already lost the war. Not the battle, not the village, the war. Berlin was weeks from collapse. American armor was rolling east through towns that no longer had enough soldiers left to defend them. German commanders were surrendering to men half their age in fields, kitchens, schoolhouses, and ditches. But inside the cellar of a burned farmhouse outside marked Erlbach, one Oberleutnant looked at the American corporal standing over him and said the one sentence that made the room go still. "I will not surrender to a Jew." The corporal was 24 years old. His name was Samuel Katz, 5'7", Brooklyn-born, the son of a tailor from Łódź, and a mother who still kept her Sabbath candlesticks wrapped in newspaper when she moved apartments. He had fought through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and the German border. He had seen men drown in winter mud at the Rapido. He had carried a radio operator with half a shoulder through mortar fire, and never once told anyone at home what that had cost him. And now, after 3 years of war, after all the maps and medals and dead friends, the only thing standing between him and a prisoner was not a weapon. It was an idea, a dying idea, but not dead enough. The German officer's name was Karl Meissner. He was 43 years old, neat even in collapse, his tunic brushed clean, his boots still polished in the places the mud had not reached. He came from a military family that had mistaken obedience for character for 3 generations. Meissner had served in Poland in 1939, France in 1940, and Russia long enough to learn that the empire promised by Berlin was not invincible. By 1945, he was no longer leading charges or drawing arrows on campaign maps. He was pushing paper through a supply office in northern Bavaria, while the army around him folded inward like a burned roof. He knew the war was ending. That was not the part he refused to accept. What he refused to accept was that the man with authority over him in that cellar wore an American uniform, held an M1 rifle, and had a small Star of David hanging from a chain under his collar. Katz had entered the farmhouse with 2 men from his patrol after a villager pointed toward the cellar and whispered that officers were hiding below. The house had been shelled 2 days earlier. One wall was open to the cold. Burned straw lay in the doorway. The staircase down to the cellar was narrow enough that Katz had to turn his shoulders sideways to descend. At the bottom, his flashlight found 7 German officers sitting against the wall. Their pistols were already on the floor. Katz gave the order in rough German. "Hands visible, stand up, one at a time, move to the stairs." 6 men obeyed. Meissner did not. He remained seated with both hands on his knees, staring at Katz as if the rifle were less real than the face behind it. Katz repeated the order. Meissner said, "Bring me an American officer." Katz answered, "You have 1 American soldier. That is enough." Meissner looked at the chain at Katz's neck. Then he said it, "I will not surrender to a Jew." The 6 other German officers stared at the floor. Not one corrected him. Not one apologized. Not one told him the war had moved past that kind of pride. That was the first truth Katz understood in the cellar. The ideology was beaten, but it had not surrendered. Katz could have struck him. He could have dragged him up the stairs by the collar. He could have told one of his men to put a bayonet in the corner of the room and let fear do the work. He did none of those things. He sent the 6 compliant prisoners outside under guard. Then he stood alone in the cellar with Meissner, his rifle steady, his jaw locked, and he said one more time, quieter now, "Stand up." Meissner folded his arms. So Katz walked back up into the ruined daylight and sent a runner for Major Thomas Arden. Major Arden arrived 16 minutes later. He was 38, a battalion executive officer from Kansas City, with the flat, exhausted face of a man who had spent 3 years watching idealism get replaced by logistics. He was not theatrical. He did not enjoy moral confrontations. and by March of 1945, he had learned that in the field there were only two kinds of authority that mattered: the authority that keeps men alive, and the authority that writes down what happened after. Katz told him the story in a voice that made the insult sound like weather. Arden listened, no expression, no interruption. Then he took off his gloves, walked down the cellar stairs, and stood before Karl Meissner. Meissner saw the major's rank and changed immediately. His shoulders straightened, his voice warmed. He said he was prepared to surrender formally under the customs of war, provided his surrender was received by a proper officer. A proper officer. That was the phrase. Arden let him finish. Then the major turned around and called up the stairs, "Katz, down here." Katz came down. Arden positioned him directly in front of Meissner. Then he spoke, not loudly, not angrily, but with a calm that made every word feel entered into evidence. "This corporal found you. This corporal disarmed this cellar. This corporal gave you a lawful order. You refused it because of what he is." Meissner's face tightened. Arden continued, "You will now surrender to Corporal Katz. You will hand him your identification booklet. You will state your name and rank, and you will say clearly that you place yourself in his custody." Meissner said nothing. Arden leaned slightly forward. "And if you refuse, I will record that you resisted capture after being ordered to surrender. At this point in the war, Oberleutnant, I would choose my next minute carefully." Meissner stood. For the first time, his hands shook. He reached inside his tunic and removed a gray identification booklet, the kind every German officer carried like a portable proof of rank. He held it out, but not to Arden, to Katz. "I am Oberleutnant Karl Meissner," he said.
"I surrender myself to your custody."
Katz took the booklet. He did not smile. He did not answer with a speech. He did not give the man the satisfaction of seeing triumph. He marked the time in his field notebook, WWII p.m. Then he walked Meissner up the stairs into the white Bavarian light. In the official battalion report, the incident became one line: 7 prisoners taken, no resistance. That was the second surrender. The first surrender happened in the cellar, the second happened on paper, and the second one failed. Major Arden did not mention the insult. He did not mention the refusal. He did not mention that a German officer had tried to keep one last piece of the old hierarchy alive after the battlefield had already destroyed it. He wrote, "No resistance." Years later, when asked why, Arden would say he was tired. Not tired in the ordinary way. Tired in the way an army becomes tired when every form, every prisoner, every village, every dead boy on the road is asking for more moral attention than a human being has left to give. He said he thought the important thing had already happened. Meissner surrendered to Katz. The corporal had the booklet. The column moved on. But records are strange things. A moment can be morally settled and still be historically wrong. 5 months later, in a requisition courthouse outside Ansbach, Karl Meissner sat before an Allied screening board. The war in Europe was over. Germany had become a continent of files, questionnaires, statements, affidavits, uniform histories, party records, prisoner cards, capture logs. The Allied occupation was trying to process millions of Germans through a machinery of accountability that was enormous on paper and overwhelmed in practice. Most men did not emerge as monsters in those files. They emerged as minor functionaries, followers, clerks, people who claimed they had obeyed, signed, stamped, transported, watched, never truly chosen. Meissner understood bureaucracy. He had lived inside it all his adult life. So he did what careful men do inside paperwork. He made himself smaller. He described himself as a supply officer, a professional soldier, not political, not ideological, never involved in cruelty, never involved in unlawful conduct, a man carried by events. And it was working. His capture report said no resistance. No resistance meant no incident. No incident meant nothing to discuss. Nothing to discuss meant the file could pass through the room and disappear into the mountain of other files waiting behind it. Then Captain Miriam Adler opened Samuel Katz's field notebook. Adler was 32, a JAG officer from Cleveland, and one of the few people in that courthouse who still believed that small discrepancies were not small when they pointed in the same direction. The report said the patrol entered the farmhouse at WWII. It said the prisoners reached the collection point at WWII. 93 minutes. For 7 officers whose weapons were already on the floor. Adler pulled the supplemental field materials and found Katz's notebook. The entry was only 6 lines. Farm cellar, 7 officers, 1 refused, called Major Arden. ID taken at 1642, refusal based on Jew. 6 lines, enough to change the shape of the room. Adler requested a supplemental hearing. Her superior denied it before lunch. He told her they had too many files, too little staff, and no mandate to turn every insult into a proceeding. This is not a history department, he said. This is an occupation government. Adler answered, then govern the record. He did not appreciate that, so she went around him. First, she wrote to Katz. By then, Katz was back in Brooklyn, sleeping in the same narrow room above his father's tailor shop, trying to remember how to wake without reaching for a rifle. Adler's letter arrived in October. He read it once at the kitchen table while his mother washed dishes 3 feet away and pretended not to watch his face. She asked him to describe exactly what had happened in the cellar. Katz did not answer for 11 days. Then he wrote back on 2 sheets of lined paper. He did not dramatize. He did not accuse. He did not even say he had been angry. He wrote the order of events like a proof in geometry. Entered cellar. Ordered surrender. 6 complied. Meissner refused. Stated reason. Arden arrived. Arden required surrender to me. Identification booklet received. Prisoner. Removed. At the bottom he added 1 sentence. He walked out in front of me and did not look back. Adler then found Arden. The major was still in Germany, moving through staff offices and demobilization orders, already halfway back to a civilian life he did not yet know how to enter. She asked him to amend his report. Arden read Katz's statement. Then he read his own line. 7 prisoners taken. No resistance. For a long time he said nothing. Finally he said, the corporal already handled it. Adler said, the corporal handled the prisoner. You handled the record. That sentence stayed with him. The next morning Arden wrote 3 paragraphs. He confirmed Meissner's refusal. He confirmed the stated reason. He confirmed that he had ordered the surrender repeated directly to Corporal Katz. The board attached the statement to Meissner's file. It did not change the classification. Meissner paid a fine, lost eligibility for certain public posts for several years, returned to civilian life. In the ordinary sense of consequence, almost nothing happened. But the file was no longer empty where the truth belonged. That is the part people misunderstand about records. They think a record matters only if it changes the verdict. Sometimes it does not change the verdict at all. Sometimes the only thing it changes is whether a lie gets to be the last official sentence. Adler did not stop with Meissner. Over the next 7 weeks, she reviewed capture files from 3 regional boards. She found 28 cases with the same shape, a clean official report, a delayed processing time, a field note or private statement that described something ugly involving a Jewish American soldier, and a main file that treated the event as if it had not happened. Not because a conspiracy ordered it. Not because one villain signed a directive. Because tired men kept choosing smooth paperwork over precise paperwork. Because every clerk thought the next clerk would not need the detail. Because every officer thought the detail would only complicate an outcome already decided. Because institutions are very good at losing truths that inconvenience nobody powerful. Adler wrote a memorandum. It was 12 pages long, typed on thin occupation paper. Filed through channels, acknowledged, then buried. She kept a carbon copy in a brown envelope and carried it home after the war. For 49 years, almost no one read it. Samuel Katz became a mathematics teacher in Queens. He taught algebra to students who learned quickly that Mr. Katz did not raise his voice, did not tell war stories, and did not accept answers that could not be shown step by step. When a student guessed, he would tap the chalk once against the board and say, "Proof first." That was his whole philosophy. Proof first. He married late, had one daughter, kept his uniform in a trunk, never displayed the medal he had earned in Italy, never told his family what happened in the farmhouse cellar. Karl Meissner became an archive clerk in Nuremberg. There is no satisfying poetic justice in that. No courtroom confession, no dramatic apology, no late-life visit to Brooklyn. In 1978, during an interview for a local oral history project, a researcher asked him about the day of his capture. Meissner paused for nearly half a minute. Then he said, "I remember the stairs, not the cellar, not the rifle, not the major, the stairs." He said he remembered walking up ahead of the American corporal and understanding, in a way he had not permitted himself to understand before, that the world which had taught him who belonged above whom had ended before he had. Then he added, "I was wrong." That was all he gave. No letter, no search for Katz, no returned booklet. Just one sentence in a transcript most people never read. Meissner died in 1984. Katz died in 1999. After the funeral, his daughter opened the trunk in his apartment and found 3 objects wrapped in a wool scarf, a silver star in its case, a field notebook, black cover cracked at the spine, and Karl Meissner's gray officer identification booklet. The booklet Katz had taken in the cellar. The booklet he had kept for 54 years. There was no note explaining why, no diary entry, no speech prepared for the future, no final message about forgiveness, vengeance, memory, or justice. Only the 3 objects, the medal, the notebook, the enemy's proof of rank. His daughter later said the strangest part was not that he kept them. It was that he kept them together. As if the 3 objects were not souvenirs, but parts of the same equation. In 2004, a doctoral researcher named Helen Weiss requested occupation screening files from the Ansbach region and found Adler's buried memorandum. 28 cases, 3 boards, the same gap repeated again and again. Weiss began cross-referencing main files against supplemental folders. The Katz-Meissner file was the first complete match. There was Katz's notebook, Arden's 3 paragraphs, Adler's memorandum, the capture time, the processing time, the line that said no resistance, and the line that proved there had been resistance of exactly the kind the official record had erased. By 2011, the regional archive had built a supplemental index for those cases. The Katz-Meissner file became entry number 1, not because it was the worst, because it was the clearest, because one corporal wrote 6 lines, one major corrected 3 paragraphs, one captain kept a carbon copy, one daughter opened a trunk, and one researcher bothered to ask why 93 minutes had gone missing from a surrender that supposedly took no time at all. There is a kind of victory in war that armies know how to celebrate. A bridge taken, a hill secured, a flag raised, a city liberated. This was not that kind. No band played for Samuel Katz, no institution apologized to him, no tribunal reversed itself, no officer lost his pension because a Jewish corporal had been insulted in a cellar near the end of a ruined war. The victory was smaller, and because it was smaller, it was harder to destroy. It lived in paper, in ink, in a daughter's hands, in a folder someone almost forgot, in the stubborn refusal of a few people to let a convenient sentence become the official truth. Katz spent 31 years teaching children that an answer without proof is only a guess. Maybe that is why he kept the booklet. Maybe he looked at it sometimes. Maybe he never did. The record cannot tell us. What the record can tell us is this. At WWII PM on March 31, 1945, a German officer who believed a Jewish soldier stood beneath him placed his identification booklet into that soldier's hands. The soldier wrote down the time. The officer walked up the stairs. He did not look back, and 59 years later, when someone finally opened the right folder, the proof was still there. Not every victory becomes a monument. Some victories survive as paper, and sometimes paper is the only thing that keeps the dead from being overruled by the convenient.